There is a version of you that wakes up tomorrow morning and feels nothing but dread before your feet even touch the floor. And there is another version of you, living the exact same life with the exact same problems, the exact same bank account, the exact same difficult people around him, who wakes up calm, clear, and quietly unshakable. The frightening part is that both versions of you could be living today, this week, this exact hour. The only difference between them is not luck. It is not money. It is not circumstance. It is a set of decisions so small you have probably never noticed you were making them. And by the end of this video, you will never be able to unsee them again. Welcome back to Wisdom of the Stoics, the place where ancient philosophy stops being a museum piece and becomes a weapon you carry into your ordinary Tuesday. If you are new here, we take the hardest teachings of Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, and Epictetus, the men who counseled emperors, survived exile, and stared down death without flinching. And we translate them into something you can actually use before your coffee gets cold. If that sounds like something you need, stay to the end, because this is one of those videos people come back to more than once. Here is the honest truth about the phrase "live your best life." Somewhere along the way it got hijacked. It got turned into a hashtag, a vacation photo, a green juice, a 5 a.m. wake-up call that makes you feel worse about yourself, not better. Real life is not a highlight reel. Real life is a delayed flight, a rude email from your boss, a friend who cancelled last minute, a body that aches in ways it did not used to, a bank account that never quite says what you want it to say. The Stoics knew this 2,000 years ago, and they built an entire philosophy not around escaping that reality, but around meeting it so completely that nothing in it could break you. Today, we are not going to give you 7 vague affirmations to repeat in the mirror. We are going to give you a working system, tested across centuries, used by a Roman emperor commanding an empire from horseback in the freezing German frontier, a former slave who turned his suffering into some of the most quoted wisdom in human history, and a millionaire advisor to a tyrant who wrote about simplicity while surrounded by unimaginable wealth. Their lives were nothing alike, their struggles were nothing alike, and yet they all arrived through pain at the exact same conclusions about what it actually means to live well. We are going to walk through those conclusions one at a time, and I want you to notice something as we go. None of them require you to change your job, your city, your relationship status, or your bank balance. They require you to change the only thing that was ever actually yours to control in the first place. Before we go further, do one small thing for me. Type the word present in the comments right now if you're ready to actually apply this instead of just watching it. I read every single one of them, and it helps me know this content is actually landing with real people trying to build a real life, not just passing time. Now let's get into it. The first thing you have to understand, before any technique, before any lesson, before any quote gets useful to you, is where your suffering actually comes from. Because right now today, you probably believe your bad days are caused by outside events, the traffic, the comment your coworker made, the message you're still waiting on, the bill that arrived. And this belief, so common that almost nobody questions it, is exactly the belief the Stoics spent their entire philosophy trying to dismantle. Epictetus was born into slavery in what is now modern Turkey. He did not choose that. His leg was permanently damaged. Some accounts say by a master's cruelty, some say by illness. He did not choose that either. He had almost no control over the shape of his early life. And yet, centuries later, his words are quoted by CEOs, therapists, athletes, and soldiers, because he discovered something that circumstance alone could never take from him. He wrote that people are disturbed not by events themselves, but by their opinions about those events. Read that again slowly, because it is the entire foundation everything else in this video is built on. It is not the traffic that ruins your morning. It is the story you tell yourself about the traffic. That you are always late, that the universe is against you, that this day is now ruined. It is not the harsh email that wrecks your afternoon. It is the meaning you assign to it, that you are not good enough, that you are about to lose your job, that everyone secretly thinks you're failing. The event is neutral. Your mind is the one doing all the damage. Now I know what some of you are thinking, because I get this comment every single time we talk about this idea. You're thinking, that sounds nice, but my problems are real. My debt is real. My breakup is real. My diagnosis is real. And you're right. The Stoics were never asking you to pretend hard things aren't hard. Marcus Aurelius ruled during a plague that killed millions, fought wars for most of his adult life, buried multiple children, and dealt with betrayal from people he trusted completely. He never once wrote that pain wasn't real. What he wrote in the private journal he never intended anyone else to read was that the mind adjusts and accommodates itself to whatever it is thrown into, and that the impediment to action advances action, and what stands in the way becomes the way. He wasn't denying the plague. He was refusing to let the plague also take his character. This is the first real shift I need you to make today, and I want you to actually pause the video for 3 seconds after I say this. Think of one thing that has been quietly ruining your mood on a loop for the past week. Got it? Now ask yourself honestly, is that thing actually happening to you right this second, in this exact moment, or are you replaying it, or pre-living a version of it that hasn't even happened yet? Most suffering, and I mean the vast, overwhelming majority of it, lives in either the replay of the past or the rehearsal of a future that has not arrived. The present moment, the actual 5 seconds you are living in right now, is almost always more bearable than the story your mind is telling about it. This single distinction between the event and your judgment of the event is called by modern psychologists cognitive reframing. But the Stoics had already mapped it out entirely 2,000 years before therapy existed. And once you actually internalize it, something strange happens. You stop asking the question, why is this happening to me? And start asking a much more powerful question. What is in my control here, and what isn't? Which brings us directly into the second lesson, the one that I would argue is the single most practically useful idea in all of Stoic philosophy, and one that, if you only take one thing from this entire video, should be this one. It is called the dichotomy of control, and Epictetus opened his entire teaching manual with it, because he considered it the doorway you had to walk through before anything else made sense. The idea is brutally simple to state and shockingly difficult to actually live. Some things are within our power, and some things are not. Within our power, he said, are our own opinions, our impulses, our desires, our aversions, in short, everything that is our own doing. Not within our power are our bodies, our property, our reputations, our positions, in short, everything that is not our own doing. Think about how much of your daily anxiety comes from trying to control things that were never yours to control in the first place. You cannot control whether your boss likes you. You cannot control whether your ex moves on faster than you do. You cannot control the economy, the weather, other people's opinions of you, whether your flight gets delayed, whether someone you love gets sick, whether the market crashes, whether your kids make good choices when you're not watching. And yet look at how much of your mental energy every single day goes toward exactly these things. You rehearse conversations that haven't happened. You imagine outcomes you cannot guarantee. You lie awake trying to control a future that fundamentally belongs to chance, other people, and time, 3 forces that have never once asked for your permission. Here is what actually belongs to you, and only you, in the entire universe. Your judgments, your effort, your intentions, your reactions, your integrity, your choice of how to respond in this moment to whatever just happened. That is the list. It is short. It is almost insultingly short compared to how much you have been trying to manage. But here is the secret nobody tells you. Because that list is so short, it is also completely entirely within your grasp. You can master it. You can become excellent at it. And when you stop pouring your limited daily energy into the impossible task of controlling other people, outcomes, and chance, and instead pour all of it into the achievable task of mastering your own responses, something remarkable happens. You start winning every single day. because you're finally playing a game you can actually win. I want to give you something practical here, not just philosophy, but something you can use in the next 5 minutes of your actual life. The next time something goes wrong, and today something will go wrong, I want you to silently ask yourself one question before you react. Is this inside my control or outside my control? If it's outside your control, and truly deeply examine whether it is, then your only job is acceptance, not resignation, not giving up, but a clear-eyed acknowledgement that spending energy fighting it is like punching the ocean. If it's inside your control, your only job is action, immediate, deliberate, unemotional action. This single filter applied honestly will save you more wasted hours of your life than almost any other habit you could build. Marcus Aurelius used this exact framework while ruling the largest empire on earth. He wrote to himself in the middle of a military campaign that he had power over his mind, not outside events, and that once he realized this, he would find strength. Not power over the barbarians at the border, not power over the senators plotting against him, not power over his own failing health, power over his mind. That was his entire empire in the end, the only one that mattered. Now let's talk about something that will feel uncomfortable, because I think discomfort is exactly what most self-help content is too afraid to give you. The Stoics did not believe in avoiding hardship. They believed in rehearsing it. This is the third lesson, and it is called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils, and I promise you, it is not as dark as it sounds. In fact, once you understand it, you'll realize it is one of the most liberating practices a human mind can adopt. Seneca, a man who was spectacularly wealthy, advisor to an emperor, and eventually forced by that same emperor to end his own life, wrote letters to his friend Lucilius about a habit he practiced constantly. He would deliberately imagine in vivid detail the worst things that could happen to him: losing his fortune, being exiled, being betrayed by people he trusted, dying. He did this not to spiral into anxiety, but for the opposite reason entirely. He wrote that nothing happens to the wise man against his expectation, because he has already imagined every disaster before it arrives. The blow that lands on a man expecting it lands far softer than the blow that catches him by surprise. Think about the difference between someone who has never once considered the possibility of losing their job and someone who occasionally, calmly, without panic, has thought through what they would do if it happened. Which one collapses when the email arrives, and which one, though still hurt, already has a plan forming in their mind within minutes? This is not pessimism. Pessimism expects the worst and does nothing. Premeditatio malorum expects the possibility of the worst, and in doing so, strips it of its power to blindside you. It is the mental equivalent of a fire drill. Nobody thinks fire drills are pessimistic. We think they're wise. We do them so that if the actual fire ever comes, the body already knows what to do and does not freeze. I want you to try something tonight, just once, to see how this feels. Before bed, spend 90 seconds imagining one thing you fear, not to spiral in it, but to visit it calmly, like checking a door is locked. What would you actually do if it happened? Who would you call? What would your first step be? Notice, almost every time, that the plan you come up with in that calm 90 seconds is more competent and more useful than the panic you would have felt if it arrived unannounced. This is not about expecting doom around every corner. It is about building an internal calm that no ambush can shatter, because you already, quietly, met the worst-case scenario before it ever showed up at your door. There's a companion practice to this one that the Stoics used constantly, and it might be even more powerful because it works in the opposite direction. It's called memento mori, remember that you will die. This sounds morbid until you actually sit with it, and then it becomes the single most clarifying thought a human being can have. Marcus Aurelius kept a servant whose entire job, according to some historical accounts of Roman generals, was to whisper reminders of mortality during moments of triumph, so that pride never calcified into arrogance. Marcus internalized this so deeply that his private journal is soaked in it. He wrote that you could leave life right now, and let that determine what you do and say and think. He wasn't being dramatic. He was using death, the single most certain fact of every human life, as a filter for deciding what actually mattered today. Here is why this matters for your ordinary Tuesday. Not just for emperors contemplating their legacy. Almost everything you're anxious about right now will not matter in 5 years. Almost everything you're avoiding right now, that difficult conversation, that apology you owe someone, that dream you keep postponing, matters intensely right now. Precisely because none of us know how much time we actually have left to act on it. The awareness of death is not meant to depress you. It is meant to burn away everything trivial so that what's left is only what's real. The petty argument with your sibling, is that worth carrying for another decade? The version of your life you keep delaying until conditions are perfect. Do you actually have unlimited time to wait for perfect conditions? Memento mori does not whisper that life is meaningless. It shouts that life is urgent, and urgency, used correctly, is one of the most motivating forces a human being can access. If any of this is landing for you right now, if you feel that click of recognition in your chest, do me a favor and hit the like button. It genuinely helps this video reach more people who are exactly where you were 5 minutes ago, stuck, anxious, and looking for something real instead of another empty platitude. Now, let's move into the part of Stoicism that I think is the most misunderstood of all, because people hear the word Stoic and they picture something cold, emotionless, robotic. That is not what any of these men actually taught. And understanding the difference is going to change how you handle every difficult emotion for the rest of your life. The fourth lesson is about the discipline of assent, which is really just a formal name for the space between something happening to you and your reaction to it. Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist who survived Nazi concentration camps centuries after the Stoics wrote, described this exact same idea in his own words, that between stimulus and response there is a space, and in that space is our power to choose our response, and in our response lies our growth and our freedom. The Stoics were describing precisely this space nearly 2,000 years earlier, and they gave you tools to widen it. Here's what almost nobody tells you about emotions in Stoic philosophy. The goal was never to feel nothing. The goal was to stop giving instant, automatic assent to every impression that flashed through your mind. When something happens, your mind immediately generates an impression, a first read of the situation, often colored by fear, anger, or hurt pride. Most people treat that first impression as absolute truth and act on it instantly. The Stoic practice is to pause, even for 2 or 3 seconds, and examine the impression before agreeing with it. Is this impression accurate? Is it proportional? Is it actually true, or is it my fear talking, my ego talking, my exhaustion talking? Picture this scenario, because I guarantee some version of it has happened to you this month. Someone leaves you on red for 6 hours. Your mind instantly generates an impression. They're ignoring me. They're upset with me. I did something wrong. This relationship is falling apart. That impression arrives in half a second, fully formed, urgent, demanding action. The untrained mind assents to it immediately, and now you're anxious for the rest of the day. Maybe you send a passive-aggressive text. Maybe you spiral into replaying every recent conversation looking for your mistake. The trained mind, the Stoic mind, catches that impression before assenting to it. It asks, is this actually true, or is this just the story my anxiety wrote in half a second? 90% of the time the person was simply busy, and the entire emotional spiral you just put yourself through was constructed on a foundation that never existed. This is not suppression. Suppression is shoving a feeling down and pretending it isn't there, and that always comes back later, usually worse. This is examination. Feel the emotion fully, notice it, name it even, and then, before you act on it, ask whether the story attached to it is actually accurate. Marcus Aurelius wrote about this constantly, reminding himself that it is not events that disturb people, but their judgments about events, and that it is within his power to wipe out every judgment that is negative and hurtful, and at once there is calm. Not because the situation changed, because his relationship to the impression changed. I want to introduce you to a technique here that combines everything we've covered so far, and it's called the view from above. Marcus Aurelius used it constantly, particularly during moments of intense stress. He would mentally zoom out, imagining himself from higher and higher altitudes, first seeing his own room, then his city, then the surrounding region, then the whole earth, then the vast expanse of space and time, watching civilizations rise and fall like passing seasons. He wrote about surveying the countless throngs, ceremonies, voyages in storm and calm, and all the disparities among things that are coming into being, that have being together, and that are ceasing to be. From that height, the argument you had this morning, the comment that stung, the deadline that feels impossibly urgent, all of it shrinks, not because it doesn't matter, but because you see it inside its actual size, instead of the artificially inflated size your anxious mind gave it at 3 in the morning. Try this the next time something feels unbearable. Close your eyes for 10 seconds and imagine looking down at your city from an airplane. Window, all those lights, all those lives, all those people carrying their own invisible weights, completely unaware of yours, exactly as you are unaware of theirs. Then imagine zooming further to the whole earth spinning quietly in the dark, carrying every argument, every heartbreak, every triumph that has ever happened on its surface, all at once, all the time. This is not meant to make your problem feel small in a dismissive way. It's meant to give you perspective, the exact tool that anxiety and rage both depend on you never having. Let's talk now about something that quietly touches every single person watching this video, whether you realize it consciously or not. And that is the question of what you actually think a good life requires. Because here is where Stoicism becomes almost radical, especially in a culture that has told you, since you were old enough to watch television, that your best life requires more. More money, more followers, more square footage, more recognition. More forever. An infinite ladder with no top rung. Because the moment you reach whichever rung you were aiming for, the culture simply moves the target further up, and you feel exactly as unsatisfied as before, just with a slightly nicer car. Seneca, remember, was one of the wealthiest men in Rome. He owned properties across the empire. He was not some ascetic hermit, lecturing you from a cave about the evils of money while owning nothing himself. And yet he wrote, with total conviction, that it is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more that is poor. He understood something that modern psychology has since confirmed through decades of research on what's called the hedonic treadmill. Humans adapt astonishingly fast to new circumstances, good and bad, and return to roughly the same baseline of satisfaction regardless of what happens to them externally. The lottery winner and the person who suffers a major setback both, on average, return to close to their prior happiness level within about a year. Your brain is not built to be permanently satisfied by an external achievement. It is built to move the goalpost the instant you reach it, which means chasing external achievement as the source of your best life is a game engineered by the architecture of your own mind for you to lose. This does not mean ambition is bad, and please do not mistake what I'm saying here for an argument to give up on your goals. Marcus Aurelius ran an empire. Seneca amassed a fortune. These were not passive men. What they understood, though, was the difference between what they called preferred, indifference, and the actual good. Health, wealth, reputation, comfort, these things are preferred, meaning it's completely rational to want them and work toward them, but they are indifferent to your actual character and your actual capacity for a good life, meaning your worth, your peace, and your virtue do not depend on whether you get them. You can pursue wealth vigorously while remaining internally free of needing it. You can pursue recognition while remaining completely unshaken if it never arrives. That distinction, pursuing without needing, wanting without depending, is the entire difference between ambition that enriches your life and ambition that quietly enslaves it. Here's a question I want you to actually sit with, not just hear and move past. If everything external that you're currently chasing, the promotion, the relationship status, the number in your bank account, the way people perceive you. If all of it arrived tomorrow exactly as you imagine it, would you actually be at peace? Or is there a small, honest voice in you that suspects you'd immediately find the next thing to chase? If you're honest with yourself, and I mean genuinely honest, most of us know the answer. That's not a failure of ambition. That's evidence that peace was never actually waiting for you at the destination in the first place. It was only ever available in how you carried yourself along the way. Let's bring this back down to something practical, because I never want this channel to leave you with only abstract ideas. Here is a small daily practice, used in different forms by all three of these men, that I want you to actually try starting tonight. At the end of each day, before sleep, ask yourself 3 questions, out loud if you can, or written down if you keep a journal. What did I do well today? What did I do poorly today? What did I fail to do today that I should have done? This exact practice comes almost word for word from Seneca, who described examining his entire day each night, asking what bad habit he had cured, what fault he had checked, in what respect he was better. Notice this practice does not ask you to evaluate your day by outcomes outside your control, how much money you made, whether your project succeeded, whether someone responded well to you. It asks you to evaluate the only thing that was ever actually yours, your effort and your character. This single nightly habit done consistently rewires your brain over months to measure your life by the metric that actually determines whether you feel good about yourself, rather than the metric your culture keeps insisting you use instead. There is one more discipline left, and I've deliberately saved it for near the end, because I think it only makes sense after everything we've already walked through. It's called amor fati, a love of fate, and it might be the single hardest practice in this entire philosophy to actually live, because it asks you not just to accept the things outside your control, which is difficult enough, but to actively love them exactly as they happened, without the silent asterisk of wishing they had gone differently. Epictetus put it about as directly as it can be put. He said, "Do not seek for events to happen as you wish, but wish the events to happen as they do, and your life will go smoothly." Read that twice, because most of us live our entire lives running the exact opposite program. We wish events would conform to our preferences, and then we suffer, repeatedly, predictably, every single time reality declines to cooperate. Amor fati flips the entire equation. Instead of demanding that life match your expectations, you train yourself to meet whatever life actually gives you as though you had chosen it yourself. I want to be careful here because this idea gets badly misunderstood, and I don't want you walking away with the wrong version of it. Amor fati does not mean pretending tragedy is secretly good, or performing gratitude you don't actually feel, or telling someone who just lost a parent that everything happens for a reason. That is a shallow, almost insulting misreading of what these men actually meant. Marcus Aurelius did not love the plague that swept through Rome during his reign because he thought disease was secretly a gift. He loved it, if that word even applies, in the sense that he refused to spend his one and only life resisting a reality that had already happened and could not be changed. He wrote that a person's actions should not be hindered, and where they cannot proceed, obstacles turn into the very material of the action. The impediment to action becomes itself the action. Notice what he's doing here. He is not saying the obstacle is good. He is saying the obstacle can become the raw material for something good. If you stop wasting your energy wishing it were a different obstacle, think about the last major setback in your own life. A job loss, a breakup, an illness, a friendship that ended badly. Now think honestly about how much of your suffering in the months that followed came from the event itself, and how much came from the constant mental replay of how it should have gone differently. The version where you got the promotion instead, the version where the relationship worked out, the version where your body didn't betray you. That replay, that endless negotiation with a past that has already been finalized, is often where the real, prolonged suffering lives, far more than in the original event itself. Amor fati is the discipline of closing that negotiation, not because the past didn't matter, but because continuing to argue with something that cannot be changed is, as Marcus put it elsewhere, like being angry at a fig tree for producing figs. Here's a practical way to start building this muscle, because I don't want to leave you with only the theory. The next time something happens that you did not want, a cancelled plan, a missed opportunity, a hard conversation that didn't go how you hoped, try saying to yourself, silently, this happened, and I will make use of it. Not this happened and it's fine. Not this happened and I'm grateful. Just this happened, and I will make use of it. That phrase does something remarkable to your nervous system. It stops the argument with reality, and it redirects all of that same energy, the energy you would have spent wishing things were different, into the only place it can actually do you any good, which is figuring out what to do next. I think about this every time I read about Seneca's final days. When the Emperor Nero, a man Seneca had personally tutored since childhood, ordered him to end his own life over suspected involvement in a plot, Seneca did not spend his remaining hours raging at the injustice of it, though by any reasonable measure he had every right to. Historical accounts describe him gathering his friends, continuing to speak with calm clarity about philosophy in his final hours, comforting the people around him who were far more distraught than he appeared to be. This is a man who spent decades writing about how to live well, being asked in the cruelest possible way to prove whether any of it was actually true when it mattered most. And by every account we have, it was. Not because he didn't feel the weight of what was happening, because the inner citadel he had spent his whole life building held. Even then, even at the very end, you will probably never face a test that extreme, but you will face, this month, maybe this week, some smaller version of the same choice. A moment where reality refuses to match what you wanted, and you have to decide right there in that moment whether to spend your limited energy arguing with what already happened, or to accept it fully and ask the far more useful question, what now? That is amor fati, not a permanent state of blissful acceptance, but a daily repeated choice to stop fighting the unchangeable past and start working with the only material you've actually been given. I want to tell you about a moment in Marcus Aurelius's life that I think captures everything we've discussed so far more powerfully than any abstract lesson could. During his reign, a trusted general named Avidius Cassius, a man Marcus had promoted and relied upon, declared himself emperor in a betrayal that could have collapsed the entire empire. Marcus's own soldiers expected him to march in fury and crush the rebellion with brutal vengeance, the way nearly every other Roman ruler in history would have responded to betrayal at that scale. Instead, historical accounts describe Marcus expressing sorrow that he would be denied the chance to show Cassius mercy and to prove that even enemies could be forgiven. And when Cassius was killed by his own men before Marcus even arrived, Marcus is said to have grieved rather than celebrated, and refused to let the rebellion's supporters be persecuted. Think about the sheer weight of that betrayal, and think about how differently most people, most of us, would react to a fraction of that hurt from a friend, a partner, a colleague. Marcus had spent years training his mind through the exact practices we've walked through today, the dichotomy of control, the premeditation of hardship, the discipline of ascent, so thoroughly that even in the face of history's most personal kind of betrayal, his character did not fracture. That is not a man who felt nothing. That is a man who felt everything and remained underneath it entirely himself. This is what living your best life actually means, according to these men who thought about it more rigorously than almost anyone in human history. It does not mean an absence of hardship. Marcus buried children. Seneca was forced to end his own life by the very emperor he had tutored and served loyally. Epictetus began his life enslaved with a permanently damaged body. None of them lived charmed lives by circumstance. What they built, brick by brick, through daily practice and hard-won discipline, was an internal fortress, what Marcus called the inner citadel, a place inside yourself that circumstance cannot invade, that other people cannot occupy, that fortune cannot plunder. He wrote that men seek retreats for themselves in the country, by the sea, in the mountains, and yet it is in one's power to retreat into oneself whenever one chooses, for nowhere can a person find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in their own mind. That retreat is available to you right now, today, regardless of your circumstances. And building it is the actual definition of living your best life. Not the version sold to you by advertisements, but the version that has survived, intact and useful for 2,000 years. Let's talk about one more area, because I think it might affect your daily peace more than any other single factor, and it's something almost every viewer watching this deals with in some form this week. Other people, specifically the difficult ones. The coworker who takes credit for your work. The family member who criticizes you every time you see them. The friend who only calls when they need something. The stranger who cuts you off in traffic and then has the audacity to act offended when you react. Marcus Aurelius, remarkably, opens the second book of his private journal, the very first thing he wrote each morning as Emperor of Rome, by preparing himself for exactly this. He wrote that when he woke, he would tell himself he was going to meet people who are meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly, and that they were like this because they didn't know the difference between good and evil. Notice what he's doing here. Because it's easy to misread this as pessimism, and it is the opposite. He is not expecting the worst from people out of cynicism. He is preparing himself, deliberately, every single morning, so that when the difficult person inevitably shows up, and they always do, he is not caught off guard by their existence. This is premeditatio malorum again, applied specifically to human behavior. You already know, if you're honest, that today you will likely encounter at least one person who is short with you, dismissive, unkind, or simply difficult for reasons that have nothing to do with you at all. The question is whether that encounter catches you by surprise and hijacks your entire day, or whether you meet it the way Marcus met his Senate, already braced, already clear about how you intend to respond. Here's the piece of this teaching that changes people's relationships the fastest once they actually apply it. Marcus goes on in that same passage to explain why he refuses to let these people damage him. He writes that no one can implicate him in anything ugly, and that he cannot be angry with his relative or hate him, because they were made for cooperation, like feet, like hands, like eyelids, like the 2 rows of teeth. Working against one another is contrary to nature, he says, and being angry at someone or turning away from them is a form of working against them. This is a radically different frame than the one most of us carry around. Most of us treat a rude co-worker or a difficult relative as an enemy to be defeated or avoided. The Stoic frame treats them as a fellow, flawed, struggling human being, whose bad behavior almost always stems from their own confusion about what actually matters, not from some personal vendetta against you specifically. I am not telling you to accept abuse or to stay in relationships that genuinely harm you. That would be a dangerous misreading of this philosophy. And boundaries are not unstoic. They are in fact an expression of the dichotomy of control. Recognizing what you will and will not allow into your life is entirely within your power and entirely your responsibility to exercise. What I am telling you is that the emotional charge you carry around difficult people, the resentment that follows you home, the imagined arguments you have with them in the shower 3 days later, all of that is optional, and all of it is costing you far more than the original interaction ever did. The person who wronged you gets 1 moment of your day. The resentment you nurse afterward, if you let it, gets unlimited access for free, for as long as you keep feeding it. Here's a practical tool for this, something you can use literally today. The next time someone is difficult with you, whether it's a rude comment, a passive-aggressive text, or outright hostility, try silently asking yourself this question before responding. What would the best version of me do right now? Not the version that wants to win the argument or prove a point, but the version I actually respect when I look back on my week. Almost every time, that best version responds with less than your impulse wants to give. Not because the other person deserves your patience, but because your peace is worth more than your need to be right in the moment. Epictetus put this in a way that still lands hard today. He said, if someone succeeds in provoking you, know that your own mind is complicit in the provocation. Nobody can make you angry without your cooperation. That is not a comfortable thought. It is, however, an enormously freeing one, because it means the last word in every difficult interaction you'll ever have actually belongs to you. I want to be honest with you about something before we move toward the end of this video. None of what I've described today is easy, and if any Stoic content promises you instant transformation, it is lying to you. Marcus Aurelius wrote his private journal, the one we now call Meditations, as reminders to himself, meaning even the man history holds up as the closest thing to a living embodiment of this philosophy needed to constantly, daily, remind himself of these principles because he kept forgetting them under pressure. Exactly like you do, exactly like I do. This is not a philosophy you master once and then coast on forever. It is a practice, meaning it requires repetition, meaning you will fail at it constantly. And the failing is not evidence that it doesn't work. The failing is the practice. Every time you catch yourself spiraling over something outside your control and gently redirect yourself back to what is inside your control, you are doing the entire philosophy correctly, even though it felt like failure in the moment. If you've made it this far into the video, I want you to know something. The fact that you're still here, past the 20-minute mark, watching a video about ancient philosophy instead of something easier, tells me you're exactly the kind of person these ideas are meant for. Not someone looking for easy comfort, but someone looking for something that actually holds weight when your life gets hard. So let's talk about how you actually take everything we've discussed and turn it into your ordinary Tuesday, starting tomorrow morning. Here is what I want you to do, and I want you to actually do it. Not just nod along and forget it by dinner. Tomorrow morning, before you check your phone, before the noise of the day floods in, take 60 seconds and ask yourself one question. What is actually within my control today? Not your whole life, just today. Your effort, your attitude, your responses, your integrity. That's it. Hold that list in your mind for a moment and let everything else, the outcomes, other people's opinions, the unpredictable events waiting somewhere in your day, fall gently out of your grip because they were never yours to hold in the first place. Then, tomorrow night, do the second practice we discussed. Ask yourself the 3 questions. What did I do well? What did I do poorly? What did I fail to do that I should have done? Write it down if you can. Do this for 7 days straight. Just 7, and notice, honestly notice, whether something in you feels different by the end of that week. Not because your circumstances changed. Your bills will still be due. Your difficult people will still be difficult. But because the lens through which you're experiencing all of it will have quietly, almost imperceptibly shifted. I want to give you one more tool before we close, something small enough to actually stick. Because I've noticed that the biggest reason people abandon philosophy like this after a week isn't that it doesn't work. It's that they try to remember 5 new practices at once and burn out trying to be perfect at all of them immediately. So if everything else from today feels like too much to hold on to just this one phrase, because it quietly contains almost everything we've covered. Whenever something happens that you don't like, ask yourself 2 questions in this order. Is this in my control? And if it is, what is the next right action? That's the whole practice, distilled down to something you can run in the middle of a stressful meeting, a difficult phone call, or a sleepless 3 a.m. spiral. It won't remove the difficulty. It will remove the paralysis, and paralysis, far more often than the difficulty itself, is what actually ruins most people's days. Consider the difference this makes across an entire week. Monday, your car won't start. Old you spends 20 minutes furious at the car, at the timing, at the universe. New you asks, is this in my control? No. And what is the next right action? Call for a tow, rearrange the morning. Wednesday, a colleague says something dismissive about your work in a meeting. Old you replays it all afternoon, drafting comebacks you'll never say. New you asks the same 2 questions. Decide whether it's worth addressing directly, and if not, let it go without renting its space in your head for the rest of the day. Friday, you get news you didn't want. A cancelled trip, a rejected application, a friend backing out of plans. Same two questions, every time and each time. A little less energy lost to the argument with reality. A little more energy available for the parts of your life that are actually yours to build. This is what these men meant when they talked about virtue being the only true good. Not because pleasure or success or comfort don't matter. They clearly do, and none of these three men lived as though they didn't. But because virtue, meaning the quality of your character, your judgment and your effort, is the only good that cannot be taken from you by circumstance, other people, or chance, everything else can be lost. Your health can fail. Your fortune can turn. Your reputation can be unfairly destroyed by people who never even knew you. But the habit of choosing your next right action, regardless of what circumstance just handed you, that stays with you until your very last day, and that, more than any achievement you're currently chasing, is what these philosophers actually meant by living well. And when hard days come, because they will, because they come for everyone, remember premeditatio malorum. You already, in some small way, rehearsed this. You are not as unprepared as the panic in your chest is telling you that you are. Remember the dichotomy of control. Ask what's actually yours to manage here and let the rest go, not in defeat but in clarity. Remember memento mori and let it remind you, not that life is bleak, but that it is urgent, and that the trivial argument, the delayed apology, the postponed dream, none of it deserves another day of your finite and unrepeatable time. And remember the inner citadel, the fortress inside you that no person, no circumstance, no piece of bad news has ever actually had the power to breach, unless you handed them the key yourself. Living your best life was never about escaping difficulty. It was never about achieving some permanent, cloudless state of ease that these men themselves never actually experienced. Not even once, not even as emperors and advisors and philosophers who thought about this more than almost anyone in human history. Living your best life is about becoming the kind of person who can walk directly into difficulty, feel it fully and remain underneath all of it, exactly who you chose to be. That is not given to you by circumstance. It is built daily through the small, unglamorous practices we walked through today, and it is available to you starting the very next time something goes wrong, which statistically is probably going to be sometime in the next 24 hours. Before you go, I want to ask you something honestly, not as a channel gimmick, but because I actually want to know. Of everything we covered today, the dichotomy of control, premeditatio malorum, memento mori, the discipline of ascent, the inner citadel, which one is the thing you most need to practice this week? Tell me in the comments, specifically, honestly, because I read them, and because saying it out loud, or typing it out, is itself the first step of actually doing it instead of just having watched a video about it. If this video gave you even one idea you're going to carry into tomorrow, do 3 things for me before you close this tab. Hit like because it tells me directly that this kind of content is worth making more of. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because we release new Stoic teachings every single week, each one built to give you another tool for the inner citadel we've been building together today. And share this with one person in your life who, you know, is carrying something heavy right now, because you never know. This exact video, at this exact moment, might be precisely the thing they needed to hear. Marcus Aurelius wrote that very little is needed to make a happy life, that it is all within yourself, in your way of thinking. 2,000 years later, surrounded by more noise, more comparison, more distraction than he could have ever imagined, that sentence remains just as true and just as available to you as it was to him. Your best life is not waiting for you somewhere out there, contingent on circumstances finally aligning in your favor. It is waiting inside the next decision you make, the next impression you examine before assenting to it. The next moment, you choose your response instead of letting the world choose it for you. I'll see you in the next one. Until then, remember, you don't need a better life to start living well. You need only a better way of seeing the one you already have.